Welcome to episode 6 of Let's Talk Random Archaeology with me, Professor Howard Williams.
And me, Afnan Esselden. Yay.
And this week, our 6th episode, having explored all sorts of aspects of Afnan's undergraduate experience and then talking to other master's students, it's all apparently going to come back to me. It's 101 questions with Howard Williams. Apparently, it's that's the working title for this episode. Is sort of exploring sort of something of my background, because in this YouTube channel that this is part of and in this series, I haven't done an introduction about myself. So it's going to be a bit about me, I think. So, but is that all right, Afnan? Should we do that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that you have so many followers that probably are interested in you, and you often do interviews with other people and other graduates and other researchers, and like no one interviews you. I want to personally interview you. I think it would be interesting.
Okay.
So yeah, let's get to it.
Fire away.
Awesome. All right. So let's start right from the beginning. Let's go all the way back to like baby Howard, young Howard. Not that you are not young at the moment. Younger Howard. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was, what got you interested in archaeology anyway, like in the first place?
I think it was as a young kid. I was given a couple of books at different times. When I was about aged 8, 9, I think one was a birthday present actually, on archaeology and human origins and early man. The book was called, early man, 70s, early 80s, type time, that kind of. And I think so. Books, going to museums, but less so museums and more. I mean, I went to the major British London museums, British Museum, Natural History Museum, and so on. But I also going to heritage sites, castles, hill forts, Uffington, White Horse, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So growing up in Reading in southern England, and my father worked on British Railways, so we had quite the ability to have staff privilege, family privilege travel. We didn't have a car, but we did get to travel to a lot of sites within a day or so. You could do sort of quite a long trip at a weekend to go and see sites and different cities and different regions. So we didn't see so much rural stuff, stuff in the middle of nowhere, because we didn't have a car, but we did get to see a lot of cities and things close to cities. And I suppose that exposure as a kid to lots of ancient monuments and a few books that led me into thinking I'd either go into something to do with nature conservation, zoology, natural history, paleontology, or archaeology. But but really, when you go to secondary school in the UK, those kind of early interests don't get kept up, maintained in terms of university education. I didn't do anything that touched on archaeology. Up until I got to university formally, in terms of, I actually didn't do a GCSE in history because I thought history sucked. So I actually did geography instead, and I did the sciences, but I did history A level, but it was all 19th century history. It's like late 18th, 19th century history. And that was all fun, but it was only when I got back to university that I started formally studying archaeology. So anyone out there who thinks you have to, we've talked about this before. If you have to have studied archaeology before, no. Few books, going to sites, and then I started doing. I volunteered on excavations, right? So, age 16, my first excavation was at Rochester Roman City, where I was supervised by Roger White and Philip Barker and Mike Corbishley, among others. Excavating on a training dig run by Birmingham Archaeology Field Unit were involved as well, and excavating the Bath Basilica, the famous excavations at Roxeter. So that was my first dig, and then 2 years later, I volunteered at Sutton Hoo, aged 18, the famous Anglo-Saxon burial site in Suffolk. So I did an excavation there, and then I knew I was going to Sheffield, and I took a gap year before going to university, finished my A-levels, and I went for 2 summers at the beginning and the end of my at the end of my gap year. I went at the age 19 to the Auvergne in southern central France with Professor John Collis and his Sheffield team. So I got to meet a lot of university students before I went to university, which was both intimidating and traumatic, but also really, really tough. I was a bit of a sickly child. I had a lot of asthma and a lot of physical I wasn't physically up to doing digs. I found a very
Yeah.
physical
Okay.
challenge, and socially it was a nightmare. I wasn't a very sociable person. I wasn't very easy to get. I'm still not really, but particularly I found it was particularly taxing social experience trying to fit in with 19-20-year-olds, and I gravitated around more the mature students and the professors, and therefore probably was a bit of a brown noser hanging around the more
Wow.
the PhD students and so on.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stand the posy little teenagers, trying to, oh look, I'm drinking, that makes me cool type
Oh.
people, but
Oh my God.
but you know what I mean is but I did get a lot of field experience before I went to university, and I suppose so. Yeah, to sum up, yeah, books, going to places in the UK mainly, and then going on field work got me into archaeology. And I actually spent in my gap year working as a quality control lab technician for a pharmaceutical manufacturer.
Wow.
Applying I did an A level in chemistry, so I applied that to get a part-time job. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed wearing a white lab coat and strutting
Yeah.
around and testing chemicals. But I knew that I wanted to go to university to do archaeology, and it went on from there.
That's really interesting. I can't believe you did an A level in chemistry.
Yeah, maths, history, and chemistry were my 3 A levels.
No way.
And I did particularly badly at A levels, having done smugly very well at GCSE, and then I didn't do very. I mean, I got into Sheffield on points rather than grades. I wasn't a particular high flyer, and and that's another point is I think we've talked about before is it just if you're a AAA student, don't think that'll necessarily translate. You may get through your degree, but it doesn't mean you're going to get a career if actually students that really apply themselves. It doesn't matter about their exact qualifications beforehand.
Yeah.
The degree is like a fresh start in many ways, and you get out of it what you put in, as we've talked about before.
Definitely. Oh, I think that's really interesting actually that you had a lot of archaeology background, I guess you could say, um with the digs, and your interest kind of flourished from volunteer work rather than from like as you said, museums or things like that, which I think is really interesting because it's very well, I guess different from me. I never went on a dig until I went to university, so I think that's really cool. I'm also I didn't know that you did chemistry and maths, but that's not really the point.
The maths went very badly. The maths was a mistake,
Mistake.
But I did very well at GCSE, but it all went downhill with the A level maths. But,
that gap between GCSE and A level is like a jump I've never experienced again in my life. Like, it's a real academic, like, it's not even like a ladder. It's like, oh, okay, so good luck. We're gonna throw you out of the plane now, and you don't have a parachute. So I mean, do your best. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad that that you thought maths was a mistake, because if it wasn't, maybe you would have gone into something else and we wouldn't be having this conversation.
We don't always do everything that works out, do we? I mean, everyone regrets things, or you just, I don't know if I regret it. I just think, oh well, that didn't work out. It's not the end of the world. I'm only scarred for life. What else could go wrong? Never look back.
Never look back. But I'm actually really glad, because I was going to ask you, like, how did you decide on the university
that's a good
that you wanted to go to? But I guess it's because you already went on the digs and you kind of saw that.
Not
No,
necessarily.
what
No,
happened?
I mean, actually, I don't know. Actually, this is a difficult one to answer, because actually, I picked Sheffield for a number of reasons. I like the science angle. They were heavy on science, but not hyper heavy. Bradford was hardcore physics, chemistry, applications to archaeology, geochemical applications, and pottery analysis, and petrology and all that. Geophysics and all the the biological sciences as well. Really hardcore science applications, and they still are, and they're great at it. And it was a toss up between them and Sheffield, which was science, but science applied to broader social archaeology, broader prehistory and early history topics. And they had so many eminent professors and scholars, from the Paleolithic scholars, Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Roman and early medieval. What they didn't do, and I They didn't do late medieval, post-medieval, contemporary archaeology, which is very few people did contemporary archaeology in the 90s. But my point is, they had a particular angle. But the other thing is, I knew I was shit at exams, and the Sheffield degree at that time was exceptional in having very little examination and a lot of coursework, and they were really exceptional in that regard. And as someone who didn't take well to that served a lot of their adult entry and their working class entry students, and it served me, and that attracted me. So I liked they were a prestigious department, real good range of options to take, but also I liked the idea of a coursework based degree and practical options there too. So that's why I chose Sheffield. But then I think that's why I can't remember which one. I think it's right and accurate to say that's why I approached John Collis about going on his dig. And so it was that way round, rather than going on his dig and going, oh, Sheffield's a nice place because I like all the people here or something like that. It was more I knew their reputation. I'd heard of John Collis's work. I think it was actually the other reason I went to Sheffield was I went to a Reading University of Reading Open Day, which is my nearest university. When I was in sixth form, I went to a day about choosing a degree subject, and then Dr. Paul Buckland, who was an environmental archaeologist, specialises in beetles, studying beetles remains. He gave this fantastic presentation at that open day about just choosing. It wasn't about come to Reading. It was about here is a day about how to get into university. He did such a fabulous talk. I thought Sheffield, this is stuff. This is the great stuff. So I chose my degree based on the reputation and what I learned about. I did a lot of serious I was over serious. I actually got offered a place by Cardiff because I went there before I was even applying, and they jotted down my name and said, well, we'll offer you a place, and they were very nice about it. And Southampton managed to put me off because I met a very eminent medieval professor there who I now know and like very much, but he was such a miserable git when I went to see him, and he put me off. And Durham was so up its own. Anyway, Durham was a little posh for me, I should say, and I didn't like that. But I did apply to a range of places, but Sheffield was the place for me. Even though I went there on the most miserable open day in the middle of the rainy Yorkshire, and it was a dire open day, and yet I was just sold on just the idea of going there was great, so I went there.
Okay, that's really nice because I think it's I mean, I'm from Yorkshire, so it's really great. But yeah, I think that is a really interesting way in which you kind of like chose your university, because like again, it was more you actually thought about the process of like it was more about what is involved in the degree, and it was you really did your research. And so I just have to ask then, do you think that you liked the scientific aspects of archaeology more so than the kind of social, or do you think that the match was good, or do you prefer the social aspects of archaeology?
Well, at that time I wasn't so sure, and I think the first year at Sheffield really made that choice for me, because some of the first year science really put me off, and it didn't. It was too technical, and I didn't see how it led to really interesting social questions. So I actually almost jumped to medieval history. Like I did a first year strand in history, and I was really put off by the first year degree actually. So having got there, I was a bit demoralized and disillusioned with archaeology, but I decided to stick with it. I had applied to do BSc Archaeological Science, but I jumped out of that because I didn't like the options in the second year. So in my second year, I was on the BA course, and then I swapped back again so that I could take the modules I wanted in the third year, and I ended up graduating with the BSc Archaeological Science degree. But I must admit, I didn't like the material sciences. I liked the biological sciences. So I did a course in zooarchaeology with Paul Halstead. I did human osteology with Andrew Chamberlain, and paleopathology with Beth Rieger. and those were and then I did burial archaeology with Mike Parker Pearson, early medieval archaeology with John Morland, Iron Age archaeology with John Collins. So I did that late prehistoric, early historic period courses as my special options, and then I also took the biological sciences, and that was what I was interested in funerary remains and what bones can tell us.
So that's really interesting. Okay, I'm so like, because I've never heard this stuff. Like, I don't know about you guys, like the listeners, if you already know this and maybe you've already kind of picked Howard's brain about this, but like, this is the first time that like I'm really like understanding your background into archaeology. I'm so interested. So like, you were interested in the kind of biological sciences of it all. So what got you into your current like Sutton Hoo and your medieval archaeology and your like,
so
why
I've been
are
on
you interested in that?
Yes, I was been on the digs, but I suppose it was in terms of the period and themes that it got me interested. It was doing Mike Parker Pearson's burial archaeology course that got me into how do we interpret funerary remains, how do we use ethnographic analogy, how do we look at the ethics of reburial, but particularly how we take a social, symbolic, and neo-Marxist approach, which is very much what Mike was doing, to funerary archaeology. And that was complemented by doing John Morland's course on early medieval Britain and Ireland, which took a very much a neo-Marxist approach to power and ideology approach to understanding early medieval societies. And that's what really got me into approaching the early Middle Ages. And then having the courses by Andrew and Beth and Paul looking at what bones can tell us, both animal and human, I felt that gave me a grounding in the actual materials. And I did other modules too, but I thought those were things. So the questions. So I did my undergraduate dissertation on deviant burial in early Anglo-Saxon England, looking at odd positionings of burials, stuff that was later going to be done much more effectively by Professor Andrew Reynolds. But at the time, it was an undergraduate thesis. It wasn't a particularly good thesis, but I really wanted to work on early Anglo-Saxon, sort of 5th, 6th century and early 7th century funerary remains, because I thought it was a great case study on the cusp of historical periods where you could reinterpret rich data sets, drawing on both the biological data, the age, sex, stature, paleopathology, and the social interpretation. And I was very much inspired by the work of Dr. Heinrich Herke, now Professor Heinrich Herke, who was at the University of Reading, my hometown. Nice. And I approached him. I actually wrote to him when I was doing my dissertation at Sheffield and said, can you give me any further advice on my area of work? And he was really helpful, sent me a lovely bibliography, met with me.
Nice.
And I realized that while he's a bit of a as most people who meet Heinrich, a bit of a scary at first encounter German guy with a big moustache, he's actually he was really kind, really professional, really supportive, and really enthusiastic about the potential of me doing the MA Burial Archaeology at Reading. Whereas, and this is interesting, Sheffield at that point was the big department. I went to them to talk about MAs, and all I got was, well, you could do that, but you won't get funding for it. And what's the point? You just get a PhD and then there won't be a job. And
wow.
Well, that's similar to the advice I give out as well. And we've talked about that I try to be honest about balancing up. I thought that was more than a little dismissive, but then I realized why. And I think at the time I didn't shine as a student that was worthy of their attention. And there was a bit of favoritism going on, but also there was a genuine, they wouldn't have seen me as a potential professor of archaeology, right? And that's partly my failing and partly theirs, and I'm not going to blame them. They didn't see how brilliant I was. No, I think I wasn't very particularly brilliant. My point is that I think they didn't take seriously my inquiries. They saw me as a bright lad, but not good enough to be an academic, and they didn't see the potential for me there. And when I went to try and have a conversation with a couple of people about doing a PhD, my work wasn't so good as to scream at them, this guy is going to be the next Colin Renfrew or the next whatever, Ian Hodder. So I understood why they didn't see my potential at Sheffield. But Heinrich was very enthusiastic at Reading, and when I got to Reading, another fabulous department, I met all these hilarious characters like Mike Fulford and Bob Chapman and his and Richard Bradley and Grenville Astle and John Crichton and Steve Mythen and Roberta Gilchrist. These are people that were at Reading. I thought, this was a good choice to make a jump at MA point, and it allowed me to pursue the things I was interested in. So Sheffield set me up with the interest in early medieval archaeology, burial data, but drawing on the osteological data too. And then the MA at Reading was perfect and unique for taking that forward.
Well, that's really nice then. Okay, I see. So that's cool, because I think that, again, like, you've had such a very different and vast experience than me. It's really, really different from mine. And I think it's really interesting what you said about how you didn't particularly shine as a student at Sheffield. They didn't really see potential in you doing an MA, which I think is kind of, story for a lot of people. It's that you're not the top of the class. You don't feel like you're maybe worthy of doing something like that, but it depends on the place, and you should really like look for a place that suits you.
Suits you and your interests, really. Otherwise you are squandering yourself. And I met people at Sheffield who would never leave Sheffield. It was because it was their world. They were happy there, and it was a great department, don't get me wrong, but people get into a rut, and it's cozy. And we talked about the advantages of staying on to do an MA at the same place, but also it was a bit of a challenge to then jump to another place. But I really, that gave me what I needed to then pursue a PhD. Whereas if I'd stayed at Sheffield, I think I would have stayed on the dole, done a part-time PhD, worked in a Tesco's or something, which is a commercial archaeologist, and I don't know, it would have been a different journey. But I went on. I applied for funded PhD at Reading with Heinrich as my primary supervisor, and then I got funding for it, part funding from the University of Reading and from the AHRB, as it was then, before it was the AHRC. To pursue a PhD for 3 years, funded PhD. And so that's the route I chose, and I think it worked for me. But equally, it was a gamble.
I do want to say, considering you're talking about it like you weren't the most great student, you weren't very, I don't know, it seems to me that you were very studious and very like the ample kind of student. Like,
put a lot of work in,
like you put a lot of effort and time into your dissertation. And I'm not saying to anyone that you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that a lot of us don't do that. And I would have never thought to reach out to a different university for information for my dissertation. And that thought didn't even occur to me in my MA. So like that's a very, I think personally, I mean, like, I'm not, my opinion really doesn't matter, but I would have said that puts you ahead of other students, because you're not just thinking about your dissertation, you're actually looking at the wider kind of like area, and like looking at
there's a number of reasons.
Help you.
There's a number of reasons you can do that. Firstly, you generally want to reach out and say, hi, I like your work. Another reason is to get specific help and guidance. And another way is networking, of actually trying to. And Heinrich put me in touch with his PhD student at the time, Nick Stoodley, who was also doing work on early Anglo-Saxon burial. So my point would be, yes, it is a good thing. Yes, reaching out can help, but it's really only if you've got the questions sorted in your head. And the problem is, as with all scholars, and particularly when I was young scholar, I couldn't see the wood from the trees. I didn't know if I had a good idea or if my work was any use. And it's really, really tough to work out, no one's done this before. I do have an angle. Unless you're a supremely arrogant and confident young scholar, it's really difficult to work out, am I doing something new? And that is really, really, really challenging for people. And I found that I worked hard, but I still felt I couldn't see the wood from the trees or the trees from the wood or anything really, just a massive fog of vegetation. And that's a real challenge for all scholars, and trying to work out when's the right point to ask people. And sometimes I remember going to conferences even as a PhD student, and I went up to people and hello, I'm Howard from the University of Reading doing a PhD on this. And they went, good. And they sort of
Great.
walked off, and you go, oh, I was going to follow up with a question, but they kind of now left the building, and it's really tough to make those connections. So I've always tried to be kind and open to new PhD students, knowing my own experience. But I must say, even with the most patient and enthusiastic turn, sometimes I have to deal with students where there's nothing I can say to them, because they really haven't. All they're saying is, hello, I exist, give me your information. And you just go,
Yeah.
that's not very professional or constructive. Do some reading first, yeah, and then come to me when you want to have specific questions on either I can help or I can't.
Yeah. I see. Okay. So, I mean, I think that's actually really helpful because, like I said, I wouldn't have thought to do that. And now that, well, you've given the advice on how to approach somebody, because I think it's kind of scary sometimes to approach somebody of such like a high level, like, oh, I don't know what to say. And like, are they going to even email me back and be like, yeah, no? Because I mean, like, that's maybe a thought that runs through people's minds. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about you. um, so I really want to know, and I want to ask about, so following your story, um, was it so you said why you chose the masters in Reading,
Yeah.
um, but do you think that was already like you had your mind set on it? Because it sounds like you kind of already, even when you were in Sheffield, you wanted to do an MA, you
Yeah, I
wanted to do
can't I can't
PhD.
remember why. I can't honestly tell you. I had a
Mm,
strong I just knew I wasn't finished with archaeology yet. I think that sounds
yeah,
almost identical to something you said in a
yeah,
previous episode. And I knew I wanted to do an MA, and I hadn't got a vision of what I was going to do with the rest of my life.
mm,
And so, one level, I would be candid and honest and say, well, perhaps it was a delay tactic. I may have never admitted to it, but I think it may have been a delay. Perhaps it was also because I felt I had more to offer. There's more to do with this interest, and I knew I had the academic skills to do it, even if I wasn't a top flight scholar. And there were people in
mm,
my year who were getting much better marks than me. I knew I could get enough good marks to get a good degree. But so I applied for the MA. I applied for funding. I didn't get funding, and I had to do an MA.
off your own
Self-funded.
back.
Yeah. So
Wow.
going back to Reading suited me because I could sponge off my parents, but also the department was one I'd never have chosen as an undergraduate because I wanted to get away from Reading. Who doesn't? But I could see the merit of coming back to Reading and doing the MA there and working with different people.
So I actually wanted to go into what, when you were doing your, specifically when you were doing your MA, I wanted to ask you about how you went around doing that, because you were working to support yourself, you're staying at home, which is a different dynamic from your university life. I wanted to ask about how that was, and then were you still interested in archaeology? Did your interest fade? How was your motivation like
Yeah,
while
I mean,
doing it?
that's a lot. Well, that's a lot. I mean, the MA at Reading was obviously a different world. I was living at home and felt very isolated, but I didn't have many friends as an undergraduate, but at least I was in shared houses and had interaction
Mm,
with others. And doing the MA there was other people on my course, but they were a pretty eclectic bunch, and I didn't have much to do with them. And I didn't have much social life, so yeah, part-time work, working in a petrol station, and then just getting on with the studies and going to classes and cycling across Reading from one side of Reading to the other, and going to either the petrol station or to the um, the um, the MA, and to the classes and the library, and trying to think of a topic to do, and opting for doing early Anglo-Saxon monument reuse. The reuse of prehistoric and Roman structures by early Anglo-Saxon burials was my topic for my thesis. But the MA
yeah.
trained me up in approaches to the theory and method of burial archaeology, cross-disciplinary approaches. I
Mm,
enjoyed that very much. But then my thesis was focused on, I had done an early Anglo-Saxon undergraduate thesis looking at burial archaeology, looking at burial ritual, but this time I wanted to look at burial location, of why
okay.
why burials were located where they were. So that's what I ended up focusing on, which got me in touch with Richard Bradley, who had touched on that topic in his research, and Heinrich Herker also was very interested in that topic. So that was a very independent piece of work. I had some supervisory meetings, but very much went off on my own, did a big gazetteer and winged it really, in many ways. But I think I produced something that has been an enduring value. I ended up publishing it afterwards, and in a couple of articles in high profile places. So some people actually thought that was my PhD, but it was my MA thesis that all stemmed from 1995. I think that was
That's
1996. Sorry, forgive me. 1996. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like, I'm thinking about it, and I think it's really cool. And I'm putting it into perspective in my timeline. That you were finishing your MA and I was 1 year old. I think that's really awesome, and I love that you have just so much history on your back, and I think it's really cool. And do you feel like when you were doing your MA, you were kind of not just motivated, but it kind of set you up for, I want to do a PhD? Do you think that you enjoyed doing your MA? Why did you enjoy doing your MA? Like,
I enjoyed some parts of it. I mean, I suppose I enjoyed the interaction with sociologists, historians, archaeologists at Reading, all of who are interested in death as a theme. I enjoyed the seminars. But a lot of the time it is just slogging on, having moments of insight, and then feeling very isolated a lot of the time. And that's all of academic work is, isn't it? Is doing things on your own and feeling like you're wasting your time, and then there's no immediate validation, or there's no affirmation that you're on the right. So enjoy is a big word. I don't know if I would go so far as enjoy, but I built my confidence, and I feel I learned a lot, and I liked applying the ideas I got from Sheffield to in conflicting somewhat with the ideas I had from my scholars at Reading, in a healthy way.
In a healthy way, okay.
There's a different differences of approach. So the training I got as an undergraduate was different from the training I was getting from different scholars and from undergraduates at Reading who'd come through with those scholars. But I thought that was a very healthy mix. And so new scholars, new environment. So I did enjoy it, but equally a lot of time was spent feeling like I was going in the wrong direction. But that never changes.
So that's really interesting. So do you feel like having the different experience from learning from your undergraduate in Sheffield and then taking on that role in Reading, you kind of, because you said that you brought in a completely different, like, I guess, mentality with you to Reading that maybe didn't necessarily mesh very well with the people there. But do you think that's what made your MA as great as it was? Do you think that mixture of different teachings?
Yeah, I think so, and field experience too, because going on excavations to sites where, particularly working at West Heslington, an Anglo-Saxon settlement and cemetery site, which is associated with a prehistoric ritual complex. So you had that connection, and that was a theme that I wanted to explore more broadly. So it was bringing those different perspectives together into a new environment, and I think. But a broader point that's important to emphasize is if you're too comfy with your lecturers and their ideas, you may still get a good PhD, but you'll always be in your comfort zone. And I saw some PhD students who are very much acolytes of particular lecturers. They really thought the sun shone out of their arse, and they did. The sun did shine out of their arses for the topics that those students were interested in. But they were very much of a mold, and that's not just true of Reading. I've seen that in every other institution where people have come. Well, I'm working with Dr. something or other on a very important topic that she's interested in, and you're going, I'm sure it is, and I'm sure your thesis will be competent, but exactly what they asked you to write in a very deferential way. And Heinrich, as a supervisor, was not perhaps the most supportive of supervisors, but he was very, very adamant that I build my own voice, that I build my own style and approach, not to become a mini Heinrich, not to become just a
Yeah,
version of him. That he was
definitely.
magnanimous enough to realize that his students should not follow. And he came from a German system that was very much geared that way, and he didn't want his students to become like that. And ironically, the British system is supposed to be much more about radical change, and yet again and
Yeah,
again I've seen the people that promote that radical change having students that very much are deferential to those radical new
yeah,
thinkers. In other words, new orthodoxies are bred, and 2-3 generations of scholars sort of languish in the glow of those celebrity, usually male professors. And I think it's much more healthy to have a climate that I was introduced to at Reading with Heinrich particularly, but also Richard Bradley and Bob Chapman too, where there was a sense that he wanted a different perspective. They wanted a different voice coming out of
mm,
in the scholarship rather than just a
definitely.
replica of theirs. And I think that's
Yeah,
the bigger issue that I want to emphasize is so important in gaining your confidence as a researcher to
yeah,
do a topic that you've selected, not simply something that's allocated to you and following a formula.
definitely. Okay. I think that's I actually really like that advice, and I think that I mean, I know that it shouldn't because I've already finished, but I'm like, oh, maybe I could have, done done it better. And like you're actually a very motivating speaker, Howard. Like I am very extremely motivated to like, you know what? Actually, I think I want to go back and study more archaeology. And like I you are just dancing away.
But I no, but my point would be that one thing I try to emphasise to students is don't think anyone else has it all sorted. They may look like they are,
Yeah.
they may talk like they are. And I remember one student when I was an undergraduate saying, I really want to pursue work on gender archaeology. And I said, oh, you mean like Meg Conkey and Joan Jarrow's book that I've just been reading for the theory class? And they were going, oh, I haven't
Who?
looked at that yet. And you go, oh, and you realise there's so many facades that people say, and they haven't even read the basic text,
Mm,
about the subjects that they profess to be interested in. And you see that level of bullshit in archaeology,
mm,
in academic archaeology and in
definitely.
commercial archaeology. And it's really insidious because it breeds a sense that everyone else has a confidence and you're the one languishing. And we have the
Yeah.
other extreme, which is the people that complain all the time about how they don't understand everything, but they somehow always manage to thrive because they're just trying to they're emotional vampires, they're intellectual vampires, they're just sucking up everyone else's energy
Yeah.
and then doing particularly well themselves. So you've got to be
Mm,
wary of the games people play and not let that erode you and take away your faith. You've got to have in a faith in who you are, but you've also got to have a little bit of adaptability and realize that every choice you make isn't going to be the right ones, and maybe you need to rethink and just experiment a bit and not
yeah.
just follow a safe path and sometimes be a bit bloody minded and realize that if someone tells you your topic is shit, maybe they're right, and other times maybe they're just saying that because they're jealous you've come up with something they haven't. you know
Yeah.
so it's a difficult game, but there's lots of people who happily erode your confidence in academia, and not
Mm,
deliberately, but because they're trying to challenge you, and that's important. But
definitely.
that can make you stronger. That can make you stronger by being challenged over
Yeah.
why you've chosen to do what you're doing and where you're going with it. I had this that's another anecdote I could tell you about. I had a very robust conversation with an undergraduate dissertation student who's just thanked me for telling them off for not focusing on a single topic, and they have so many
Yeah.
great ideas. And I said, this is not good enough. Not all you've got 5 dissertations here. All of them are good, but you need to pick one.
Yeah.
And by just not telling them which one to pick, but prompting them to acquire the confidence themselves to make the decision. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a good supervisor should do, is to
Mm,
give you the space to make a decision,
yeah.
rather than telling you which decision to make.
Definitely. And I really like that. And I think that is really interesting because you don't want to be a copy. And as much as it sounds very like obvious, and I'm not even gonna lie, like the amount of times that you've said it to me, the lecturers have said it to me, um, you really need to do your reading and you need to And while archaeology, especially with dissertations and especially with any essay, it is broad but specific. And I think like you need to do the broader reading to then find a nice little like, you start off saying this is everything and this is what I want to pinpoint and what I want to talk about. And it's like, do the reading, and you're like, yeah, but the reading and the reading, oh, but I don't want to. And it's like, no, it's so important to understand the basic things. And yeah, about maybe 70% of what you read you're not even going to use. It's
Yeah.
just background knowledge, and I think that that's the most important thing to remember. And I like that you have basically, I just said the same thing. Yeah, you need to know it, whether you think you do. It's the basic understanding of archaeology that kind of makes your work come to light, and I think that's really great. And I think that you were an awesome supervisor. You do
Oh,
help and you try your
thank
best
you.
to help. Oh no, it's
But
okay.
I got those from my own experience of struggling myself, not, and I felt bitter at various points about
Mm,
supervisors not doing that for me. And I,
yeah.
in hindsight, I think I was right to feel bitter, and sometimes, and other times, I think it was really unfair of me to feel why have they not spoon fed me this? How dare they not? You know, well, the answer is that was your job, Howard. So
Yeah.
my point would be, as a student, you do get frustrated with your supervisors. You do get frustrated by it not being clear what you should be doing,
Mm,
but that's because you have to do the bloody work to find out. And but then there are other points where I would think, actually, they were crap on that. I would have really easily made it, the work a lot easier if they'd just given me a clearer steer or something. So I won't say
yeah.
they were faultless, but equally, you know a lot of the blame always rests with the individuals, and that applied to me as a undergraduate and an MA student. Is I think I did really well, but equally, there are things you just go, that couple of months could have easily not happened, and I could have just jumped it and wasted time.
Yeah. Aw.
But that's
Well,
true of
I
academia, isn't it? It's not always clear what
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Aw. Well, I personally, so I hope that, are there any final thoughts that you would like to give about your experience and how you feel like your journey of archaeology has changed for the better, changed for the worse? Any advice that you can give? Because there's a lot more for us to talk about, and I want to talk about it. Um, so yeah, please, let's have some final words.
So thinking about the first 4 years of my academic career as an
Mm,
undergraduate and a master's student, I should have and could have. Well, I don't know if I should have, but I could have left it there. I could have
yeah,
just left archaeology as a degree, a graduate degree, and gone on into something else. And you don't have to do a PhD. In
yeah,
fact, you shouldn't do a PhD unless you have an
okay,
idea and a
yeah,
vision of what you hope to do with it. But
yeah,
so I would say, don't let people erode your self-confidence. Don't let people tell you that you're wasting your time. You've chosen to do this degree, and
mm,
it's important to pursue it to the best of your ability and circumstances. And
yeah,
that's to not cut you know not to criticize yourself at every failing, but to stick with the
mm,
plan of action. And I'm very much someone in my career that, even if I hate it and even if it's going wrong, I will finish it. I will
yeah,
finish that piece of work. Having said that, there are loads of things I haven't finished in my career still, and they claw at me, and they eating away at me. But a lot of things I've concluded that I've hated, and then you look back and you go, yeah, that was worth it. You've achieved it. And it's
yeah,
about a body of work, building a body of work, individual essays, individual projects, individual fieldwork experiences, building that CV, building because you don't know which bits will be applicable. You cannot predestine which bits are going to be applicable. And I just like to say that if I'd left archaeology in 1996 with an MA and a BSc, I'd be proud to this day with what I achieved, and that would have been that. And I think
nice,
you've got to always just say to yourself, well, You know, this is where I've come to.
Yeah.
Let's think about what I'm going to do next. But whatever I do next, I've got to be proud of what I've achieved. You know, don't let anyone else say, "Oh, it's just a degree. It's just an MA." No, these are major achievements, and I think that's true of all. I mean, it's a shed load of work, shed load of money, shed load of time, and don't let anyone take away those experiences, but also the knowledge, but also the slog, the hard graft to get where you get. But then you can't presume, you can't feel that entitles me to funding, that entitles me to a PhD, that entitles me to a lectureship.
Yeah, definitely.
And I know this is really unpopular thing today because everyone complains and criticizes rightly the employment prospects, the treatment of graduates and so on. But equally, it must be remembered that if you want to treat this as a competitive profession, then no one is entitling you. It's not a training, it's not an apprenticeship. Get a PhD and you will get a job. I'm sorry, no. Don't do it if you think it's like that. You're very naive if you think it's like that. So don't go any further. Don't invest any more time and money into it until you've thought through: does this do what I want it to do? Am I hoping to utilize this, to leverage this? And that's it. I've had enough.
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion.
Yeah.
The rest of my life is on positive other things, and you'll never lose that experience. You'll never lose that memories of that time. It's just, the PhD is another phase, another whole chapter that has to be tackled seriously and separately, not as a natural progression, I feel. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I think that really wise words. And I mean, having done an MA myself, I definitely don't think I have it in me to do a PhD. I don't think I have the motivation, the smarts. That's not even a word, but yeah. There you go. Kind of proves my point.
I like that. You just made that up, didn't you? It sounds like something someone would say. I can see it in a sort of one of these sort of cop shows. You haven't got the smarts to get,
But yeah, and I mean everything, I don't know, for me, everything you always say always comes into like it's always advice for me, and I think it's always interesting, and I think that you have such knowledge about so many things, and I love picking your brain. So I really, really enjoyed talking to you. I wanted to say I'm very excited because next time we're going to definitely talk about your PhD. I'm very interested. I want you to pick it apart. I'm going to pick it apart.
Okay. Right. Okay.
And
dear, I'm nervous
I hope
now.
that I really want to know about the transition from MA to PhD. I've never done it myself. And I know a lot of people finished at that MA or MSc stage. And I think that not just with archaeology, but with other degrees as well, I think that jump could be really interesting to know about. Maybe it'll be the same from GCSEs to A level, just getting pushed out of a plane. Who knows? I'm really, really excited for it. And I know that I'm sure everyone else is too. And I'm really thankful. Thank you so much for giving your advice and like giving just your story, because I think we all listen to your videos and we all watch your videos, and it's always you asking other people, and you kind of get a word in of your own experiences here and there, but no one really knows it properly. And I'm interested, so I'm definitely sure other people are interested. From where did Howard Williams come from? Like where did he begin and where did
Man
he
of
start?
mystery. Who is he? The man behind the mask.
Right? Because I do love it. Like, if you search literally anything remotely related to medieval archaeology, your name does come up on Google Scholar. You will find books with your name on it, or edited editions, or literally anything related to the subject. So thank you so much for today. And so
it's been great. Thank you so much.
No worries. That's excellent. All right. So I never close these, so I'm gonna hand it back to you, Howard, to close the 101 on Howard Williams.
Well, I think you've done it. So we'll end it there. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Good morning. Bye.
Good morning. See you.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeo Death video, why not check out the Archaeo Death blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.